The chronometer on the flagship's bridge read 0 and that was the first thing that was wrong. High Admiral Vexcor watched the numbers on his tactical display fall like a heartbeat slowing to death. 800 ships, then 316, then 214, then 97, then 23. The last fleet burned in 34 seconds, and the silence that followed was not an absence of sound, it was a weapon. He opened his mouth to issue a command. No sound came out. His throat worked, but the chest resonator that had amplified his voice for 7 years gave only a dry click. The bridge crew had stopped moving. They stared at their consoles, at the empty space where the human fleet had been, at the void that now held only the cold light of distant stars. Vexcor's claws scraped against the armrest of his command chair. The ceremonial scar across his right eye burned, a phantom ache from the siege of Tesser, 7 years ago, when he had first learned that humans could run faster than they could fight. But they had never fought like this. They had never fought at all. He looked at the chronometer again. 0 WIDS. It had been running for 9 years without a reset. He had never noticed the glitch. Now it felt like a verdict. The human fleet was not advancing. It was not retreating. It simply hung there, 37 ships in the dark, waiting it. The transmission from the council chamber had ended 47 seconds ago. The last human voice he had heard was the ambassador's. "You have 3 minutes." He looked at the chronometer. 3 minutes had passed. The galaxy's classification system, 9,000 years of certainty, had been based on a 300-year-old error. He had 34 seconds to understand it. Then the silence came. "I wish I could tell you it ended there. It didn't. Stay close." 3 days earlier, the Obsidian Rotunda had been the seat of galactic governance for 9,000 years. It had heard every argument, every war, every extinction. It had never heard a species choose silence as a weapon. The Rotunda itself was carved from the fossilized heart of a dead star, a sphere of black stone veined with silver light that pulsed in time with the chamber's ancient environmental systems. 46 species representatives sat in tiered rings that rose like the ribs of a giant skeleton. The air smelled of pale stone, recycled oxygen, and the faint burnt sugar tang of the Kovani Arbiter's ceremonial incense. High Admiral Vexcor stood at the center platform, his leathery bronze hide gleaming under the central lumen. He was 2.7 meters tall, and his shadow fell across the lower tiers like a warning. The metallic implants along his jawline caught the light, a reminder of the assassination attempt that had failed 3 years ago. He had survived. His enemies had not. He was celebrating. 3 worlds in 60 days, he announced, his voice modulated through the chest resonator into a deep thrum that filled the chamber. 42,000 human civilians relocated, 1,200 soldiers neutralized. The Thurnus system is now Vrethkar territory. He paused, letting the numbers settle. The mathematics are simple. We have 1,200 ships. Earth has 37 combat vessels in the system. They are Category 7 primitives. They cannot defend themselves. They cannot retaliate. They cannot even coordinate a response faster than our comms can jam. The chamber applauded. The sound was a dry rustle of hands, claws, and chitinous appendages, respectful, measured, institutional. The Kovani High Counselor Lycia, wearing a crown of glowing equations that shifted with her thoughts, nodded once. Her species had administered the council for 18 centuries. She had seen species rise and fall. She did not expect this one to be any different. Elder Vithra did not applaud. She sat in the Valley Observer's tier, a diminutive figure with gray-blue skin and an elongated skull that seemed too large for her frail body. She had been alive for 200 years, which was young for a valley, but she had already seen the pattern. The Vrethkar had conquered 9 campaigns over 5 worlds in the last 40 years. The council had ratified every single one. She had voted no on all of them. This was her 12th no vote. She raised her hand. The chamber's procedural light blinked, acknowledging her. But no one looked at her. The vote was already decided. Lycia's voice rang out. All in favor of ratifying Vrethkar Dominion's claim to Thurnus system and reclassifying human combat capability to Category 6 to reflect their failure to mount a defense raise. A forest of limbs rose, Vithra counted. 387 in favor, 1 against. Herself. Ratified, Lycia said. The record will reflect this decision. Vithra lowered her hand. She had spoken 9 times in the last 20 years. Each time she had been dismissed by procedural motion. She did not speak now. She simply watched the doors at the far end of the rotunda. She knew the human ambassador was late. She had always been late. Ambassador Sarah Kale entered the rotunda 12 minutes after the vote. She was 57 years old, and she had been Earth's voice in this room for 22 years. She had never raised her voice. She had never interrupted. She had read 43 statements into the silence of the rotunda, each one a careful request, a documented protest, a recorded objection. None had ever changed a vote. She wore a matte gray diplomatic coat that had once been crisp but now hung loose on her shoulders. The left sleeve bore a permanent coffee stain, a brown smear that had faded to a dull rust over time. It had been there for 18 years. It was from the last morning her husband had poured her a cup before his ship left for the Thurnus frontier. The ship had never returned. She had never had the coat cleaned. She never would. She walked to the speaking platform with a measured gait. Her shoes made soft clicks on the fossilized stone. She carried a 2-page document folded once, held in her right hand. Her left hand rested at her side, fingers slightly curled, a habit she had developed when she was a xenolinguist, counting the syllables of alien speech to keep her own rhythm. High Counselor Lycia turned toward her. Ambassador Kale, the vote has concluded. You are welcome to submit a formal objection for the record. I am not here to object, Sarah said. Her voice was low, flat, almost conversational. I am here to inform. Vex Kor laughed. It was a grinding sound, like stones shifting in a landslide. Inform us of what? That you lost 3 worlds? That your fleet is a joke? We have already won, Ambassador. The mathematics are not in your favor. Sarah did not look at him. She unfolded the document. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, but the ink was fresh. She had written it herself the night before, alone in her quarters, with a cup of cold coffee beside her. On Sol date 247/04, she read, Earth's Defense Council activated Operation Shepherd. The operation was prepared 300 years ago, classified under the Veyron Charter. It was designed to be activated in the event of an existential threat to human-occupied space. Vex Kor's laughter stopped. His claws retracted slightly. 300 years ago? Your species barely had spaceflight 300 years ago. We had a committee, Sarah said. We had a plan. We had time. She turned a page. Operation Shepherd authorizes 37 vessels to engage the Vrethkar fleet. High Admiral Vex Kor has 800 ships. This is not a concern. Lycia leaned forward. The equations on her crown flickered. Explain. Sarah looked up. For the first time, her eyes met Vex Kor's across the chamber. The scar over his eye caught the light. She did not flinch. Earth has been quiet for 300 years, she said. We knew you would categorize us. We knew you would vote against us. We also knew you had never seen what we were building. She folded the document, creased it along the same line it had been folded 100 times before. You have 3 minutes before the first engagement. I suggest you open a viewing channel. She turned and walked off the platform. Her shoes clicked once, twice, then stopped. She paused at the edge of the tier, her left hand still curled at her side. She did not look back. In the rotunda, the council representatives stared at the viewing channel that had opened in the center of the chamber, a holographic projection of the Thurnus system, 37 human ships arranged in a loose formation, and the Vrethkar fleet. The coffee stain on her sleeve caught the light, a brown smear on gray wool. It was the only warning the galaxy had ever been given. No one read it. 3 minutes passed, a swarm of bronze hulls that blotted out the distant sun. Vex Kor stood frozen on the platform, his chest resonator silent. He had not spoken since the ambassador left. He was watching the projection, counting the human ships, recalculating the mathematics that had always been so simple. Elder Vithra was the first to notice the drone. It was small, barely visible at the edge of the human formation, a single craft traveling at 0.12 light speed, moving toward the Vrethkar flagship with a trajectory that looked almost lazy. Vithra's gray-blue fingers tightened on the armrest of her seat. She had seen this pattern before. Not in battle, but in the old records. The valley had been observers for 9,000 years. They had watched civilizations rise and fall. They had seen patience used as a tactic. They had never seen it used as a weapon. The drone reached the flagship in 34 seconds on the projection. The Vrethkar dreadnought's main battery rotated 47 degrees left and fired on its own support frigate. The frigate exploded in a white bloom that lasted 3 seconds. Then the human fleet began its work. Vasquez was the first human to fire a weapon that day. He sat in the cockpit of the Shepherd's Call, his scarred hands gripping the controls. He had flown 21,000 combat hours. He had survived a cockpit fire that had melted the skin on his forearms. He had never fired a shot in anger. He had been waiting for this moment for 14 years. The display in front of him showed the Vrethkar fleet in real time. 800 icons, each one a ship, each one a life. He took a sip of cold coffee from the thermos wedged beside his seat. The coffee was bitter and old. He had been brewing it since the operation was activated. "Wave 3, he said into his comms. "Cut their comms." Captain Li Wei, on the bridge of the long memory, transmitted a 0.3-second pulse that carried 3,400 encoded commands. The pulse was not a weapon, it was a key. Every Vrethkar ship in the system had been factory designed with a vulnerability, a backdoor in the comms array that had been identified from schematics obtained 37 years ago, when the first Vrethkar vessel had been recovered from a derelict salvage operation. No one had checked the schematics. No one had thought to. The pulse reached the Vrethkar fleet in less than a second. Every ship lost communication, not jammed, not disrupted, but erased. The comms arrays went silent. The crew on each vessel could see their instruments, could see the human fleet approaching, but they could not send a single word to each other. Vasquez watched the display. The Vrethkar numbers began to fall. 800 became 316 in the space of a breath, then 214, then 97, then 23. He took another sip of coffee. "Bring them home," he said. The silence came. 8,000 data buoys, placed over 14 years in every Vrethkar-occupied system, activated simultaneously. They broadcast nothing, no signal, no message, no sound. They simply erased every frequency in the Vrethkar spectrum, from military channels to civilian networks to emergency frequencies. For 9 minutes, every Vrethkar world went dark. On Vrethkar Prime, High Admiral Vex Kor stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the display that now showed only 23 friendly icons. He opened his mouth to issue a command. No one answered. The chronometer on Vex Kor's flagship had stopped at 0-0-9 years ago. He had never known why. Now he understood. It had been counting down to this moment. The silence that fell when 800 ships became 23, and the 23 lost the ability to speak to each other. The bridge crew stood frozen. A lieutenant with a cracked horn on his left temple stared at his console, his claws hovering over a keyboard that no longer responded to any command. The flagship's reactor hummed at idle. The life support whispered. The stars through the viewport were the same stars that had been there 3 minutes ago, but they looked different now. Cold, distant, indifferent to a species that had just learned it was not the apex of anything. Vex Kor's chest resonator clicked again. He touched the metallic implants along his jawline, feeling the scar tissue beneath. He had survived an assassination attempt 3 years ago. He had rebuilt himself. He had never rebuilt himself for this. The display flickered. 23 icons. Then, one by one, they started to blink, not exploding, not retreating, simply losing power. The human fleet had not fired on them. The human fleet had not needed to. The pulse had done something to the power distribution nodes. Something that had been written into the schematics 14 years ago, something no Vrethkar engineer had ever checked because no Vrethkar engineer believed a Category 7 primitive could read a blueprint. "Communications," Vex Kor said. His voice came out as a rasp's, dry and thin. "Restore communications." The lieutenant with the cracked horn looked up. "High Admiral, the arrays are erased, not jammed, erased. We cannot transmit, we cannot receive." The flagship's main viewer switched to a new signal, not a transmission, not a broadcast, but a single line of text that appeared on every screen in the Vrethkar fleet, on every civilian terminal, on every Vrethkar world. "We are alone." Vex Kor stared at him. "Alone. Every ship in the fleet is silent. The data buoys." The lieutenant stopped. His claws trembled. "The buoys have gone dark. Every Vrethkar system. All of them. We are." He did not finish. On every emergency frequency that had just gone silent and then come back with nothing but these words. Silence is the loudest thing we ever learned to speak. The words were in perfect Vrethkar. The grammar was flawless. The syntax was ceremonial, the kind of formal address used only in the presence of a planetary ruler. Someone had written this message 37 years ago when the first Vrethkar schematics had been recovered. Someone had been waiting, Vex Core read the line 3 times. Then he looked at the chronometer. 9 minutes had passed since the silence began. 9 minutes since the galaxy had been given a lesson it had never asked for. He opened his mouth to speak. No one answered. In the Obsidian Rotunda, the viewing channel had gone dark. 46 species representatives sat in tiered rings, their limbs frozen mid-gesture, their eyes fixed on the center of the chamber where the holographic projection had shown the Thurnus system. Now it showed nothing, a sphere of black stone that reflected only the silver veins of the rotunda's own walls. High Counselor Lycia's crown of glowing equations had stopped moving. The equations had frozen at a single point, class unknown. She had never seen that error code. The system had not been designed to handle a Category 7 species that could erase a fleet in 34 seconds. We are attempting to restore the feed, Scribe Marin said from behind the procedural desk. His voice was flat, professionally neutral, the voice of a species that had recorded votes for 18 centuries. The Vrethkar networks are unresponsive. We have received no communication from High Admiral Vex Core or his command structure. That is because they cannot communicate, Elder Vithra said. She had not raised her hand. She had not voted. She had simply watched from the Valley Observer's tier, her gray-blue hands clasped in front of her, her elongated skull tilted slightly to the left, a posture of attention that her species had used for 9,000 years. She stood now. The chamber's procedural light flickered, recognizing her, but no one stopped her. No one dismissed her. The council had never heard a Valley speak at this volume before. They cannot communicate, Vithra repeated, because their comms have been erased. Not jammed, erased. The human fleet transmitted a 0.3-second pulse that carried 3,400 commands. Every Vrethkar ship was built with a vulnerability that was identified 37 years ago. The schematics were publicly available. No one checked them, she paused. The chamber was silent. Ambassador Sira Kale read a statement 3 minutes before the engagement. She said Earth has been quiet for 300 years. She said they knew we would categorize them. She said they knew we would vote against them. Vithra's voice was soft, almost gentle. She also said they had never seen what she was building. Lycia leaned forward. What was she building? She was building time. Vithra looked at the empty speaking platform where Sarah Kale had stood. The matted gari coat was gone. The coffee stain was gone. The woman herself had walked out of the rotunda 12 minutes ago and had not returned. She was building the patience to wait until the moment when the galaxy's certainty became its blindness. We gave her 300 years. She used every single one. The equations on Lycia's crown flickered. Class unknown remained. What do we do now? Someone asked from the lower tiers, a Valley young, scared. Vithra did not answer. She sat down. The silence in the rotunda was not the silence of the Vrethkar worlds. It was the silence of a species that had just realized it had been wrong for 9,000 years and did not know how to say it. That silence lasted 2 hours. In that time, the data buoys continued their work. 8,000 of them, spread across 14 years and 87 Vrethkar-occupied systems, sent a continuous loop of the same message, not a threat, not a demand, not a warning. Just the words in perfect Vrethkar repeated once every 60 seconds. Every Vrethkar citizen heard it. Every Vrethkar soldier read it. Every Vrethkar politician tried to respond and found their comms dead. On Vrethkar Prime, High Admiral Vex Core watched the message cycle on his flagship's main viewer. He had not moved from his command chair. His claws had gouged the armrest, leaving parallel grooves in the bronze alloy. The lieutenant with the cracked horn had tried to speak to him 3 times. He had not answered. He was counting. 23 ships, 14,000 crew, 9 campaigns over 40 years. 3 worlds in 60 days. 1,200 ships at the start of the engagement. All of it erased by a pulse that lasted less than half a second. He had measured victory in ships destroyed. He had never considered a war where ships did not matter. The message cycled again. Silence is the loudest thing we ever learned to speak. Vex Core read it, and for the first time in 7 years, since the scar across his right eye had been carved by a human soldier on Tesser, he felt something other than certainty. He felt the weight of a clock that had been ticking for 300 years and had just struck 0. He closed his eyes. He had no one to command, no one to speak to, no one to ask. The silence was complete. 2 hours and 7 minutes after the engagement, the Galactic Council reconvened in emergency session. The rotunda was half empty. The Vrethkar delegation had not arrived. Their representatives had been recalled to Vrethkar Prime 12 minutes after the silence began, and they had not returned. Their seats stood empty, bronze-upholstered cushions that had held the weight of 3 generals, 2 admirals, and a minister of conquest. Now they held nothing. The human seat was empty too. Ambassador Sarah Kale had not been seen since she walked off the speaking platform. Her quarters were unoccupied. The chamber's entry logs showed that she had exited the rotunda, crossed the observation corridor, and taken a transport to the orbital dock. No one knew where she had gone. High Counselor Lycia sat at the center of the upper tier, her crown of equations motionless. She had not spoken in 93 minutes. She was reading the classified Valley records, the ones that Vithra had been compiling for 2 centuries, the ones that had been dismissed because a Valley's vote had never changed anything. She read the 9th no vote, the 10th, the 11th, the 12th. She read the reports that Vithra had submitted after each Vrethkar conquest, the civilian casualties, the environmental damage, the pattern of escalation that should have been obvious to anyone who looked at the numbers. She read the note at the end of the latest report, written in Vithra's precise hand. The Council is not wrong because it lacks information. The Council is wrong because it has already decided what the information means. Lycia closed the file. She looked at the empty Vrethkar seats. She looked at the empty human seat. "We have received no communication from Earth," Scribe Marin announced. "The human fleet remains in the Thurnus system. They have not advanced. They have not retreated. They have not responded to any of our hails. Have we tried the ambassador's personal channel?" Someone asked. "She is not responding. Have we tried her coat?" Vithra said. The chamber turned toward her. She was still seated, her gray-blue hands still clasped in front of her. She did not look up. The coat she was wearing, Vithra said, it had a stain on the left sleeve. Coffee. She never had it cleaned. She never would. The stain was 18 years old from the last morning her husband poured her a cup before his ship left for Thurnus. The ship did not return. She kept the coat because it was the only thing she had left. She wore it because it was a reminder. She paused. The equations on Lycia's crown flickered. She wore it to every council session for 18 years. Every statement she read. Every protest she filed. Every vote she lost. She wore that coat into the rotunda, and the stain sat on her sleeve like a scar no one ever asked about. Vithra's voice tightened. "We asked about the ships. We asked about the fleet. We asked about the mathematics. We never asked about the stain." Lycia leaned forward. "What does the stain tell us?" "It tells us that she was human." Vithra finally looked up. "It tells us that she loved someone and that someone died, and that she carried that death with her into this room every single day for 18 years. It tells us that she was not a statistic. She was not a Category 7 classification. She was a person who had been waiting for the right moment to speak, and when she spoke, we did not listen." The silence in the rotunda was heavy enough to taste. "The message," Vithra continued, "is not a threat. It is not a warning. It is a statement of fact. Earth has been silent for 300 years because they were learning, they were listening, they were reading our schematics, watching our votes, counting our certainties. They did not need a fleet. They needed time, and we gave it to them." She stood again. This time the chamber did not stop her. High Admiral Vex-Kor believed he had won because he had the numbers. He had 800 ships. Earth had 37. The mathematics were simple. But he was counting the wrong things. He was counting ships. Earth was counting years. He had never considered a war where ships don't matter. She walked to the speaking platform. Her small body looked fragile against the backdrop of fossilized Starheart, but her voice carried to every tier. "Shepherds do not fight wolves," she said. "They end them." The galaxy went silent because for the first time, we did not know what to say. "We have been speaking for 9,000 years. We have voted, classified, ratified, dismissed. We have never listened. And now the one species we called primitive has done something no fleet could do. They have made us hear our own silence." She stepped back. The chamber held its breath. Then Scribe Marin spoke. "We have an incoming transmission from the Thurnus system. It is not from the human fleet. It is from a Vrethkar civilian network. It is broadcasting on all frequencies." "Put it through," Lycia said. The viewing channel flickered. The holographic projection returned, not of ships, not of battle, but of a single face. High Admiral Vex-Kor sat in his command chair, his bronze hide dull, his claws still gouging the armrest. His chest resonator was silent. He was looking directly into the camera, not at the council, not at his crew, but at something beyond them. He was looking at the countdown that had been running his entire life and had just reached 0. "The message is correct," he said. His voice was flat. "Silence is the loudest thing we ever learned to speak. I have learned it now. We have all learned it now. The Vrethkar fleet is no longer operational. We have no communications. We have no reinforcements. We have no allies." He paused. He touched the scar over his right eye, the one from Tessar, the one the human soldier had given him. "Earth did not destroy us," he said. "Earth made us irrelevant. There is a difference. I did not understand it until now. I will spend the rest of my life understanding it." The transmission cut off. The rotunda was silent. No one spoke. No one moved. The equations on Lycia's crown had frozen again, a new error code, one the system had never encountered. No procedure defined. The representatives looked at each other. They looked at the empty Vrethkar seats. They looked at the empty human seat. They looked at the empty space on the viewing channel where Vexacor's face had been, and they realized something. The human fleet was still there, 37 ships in the dark, waiting. They had not advanced. They had not retreated. They had not sent a single message since Sarah Kale walked off the platform. They were simply there, in the silence they had created, and the silence had become the loudest thing in the galaxy. "We need to contact Earth," someone said. "We don't have a number." Scribe Marin replied. That was the moment the galaxy learned that silence was a language it had never studied. The Council had no procedure for a species that wouldn't answer. Scribe Marin opened 37 classified communication protocols. Each one failed. The human fleet ignored every hail, every frequency, every diplomatic handshake that had worked for 9,000 years. The data buoys continued their loop. "Silence is the loudest thing we ever learned to speak." Lycia's crown of equations settled on a single word, unknown. "We are being treated as irrelevant," she said. "Because they don't need to ask," Vithra said from the speaking platform. "They wanted us to see that we were wrong. Now they are waiting for us to say it out loud." A Kovani representative leaned forward. "Say what? That we classified them incorrectly, that we dismissed them for 300 years and never asked who they actually were." Lycia raised a hand. "Elder Vithra, you compiled records on human capability for 2 centuries. Did you know about Operation Shepherd?" Vithra paused. "I knew they had time. I did not know they had a plan. Time is not a plan. Time is a resource. Earth used it better than anyone in this room. That is not a violation of protocol. That is a failure of imagination." On Vrethkar Prime, High Admiral Vex Kor sat alone in his quarters. The bronze plaques on his wall bore the names of 9 conquered systems. He had looked at them every day for 40 years. Now they looked like obituaries. He touched the scar over his right eye. The human soldier who gave it to him had been 23. She had screamed when he killed her. He remembered her face, not fear but purpose. She was running toward something. She was running toward the countdown. He reached for his personal communicator. His daughter appeared on the screen. "Father, we have no comms. Why are you calling?" "Because the human fleet did not destroy the civilian networks. They erased the military channels. They wanted us to see what we had lost. What did we lose?" He looked at the plaques. "Everything. We lost the belief that we were right. We lost the war without firing a single shot." His daughter said nothing. "I am sending you coordinates. If the humans ever speak again, I want you to be ready to listen." "Why me?" "Because you are young. You still know how to learn." He closed the channel. 2 hours later, the Council received a transmission from a valley observation post. "I have footage," Commander Eshra said. "The human ships are not combat vessels. They are cargo haulers retrofitted with drone launchers. The 37 ships were empty. The human crew consisted of 19 people, 1 per 2 ships. The chamber went silent. "Repeat that," Lycia said. "The ships were decoys. The drones were the only weapons. They transmitted 12 million commands in 0.3 seconds. The commands exploited a vulnerability identified in a single Vrethkar destroyer recovered 37 years ago. Every Vrethkar ship was built from the same schematics. No one checked them." The equations on Lycia's crown read, "Impossible." "If the ships are empty," a young Valley asked, "where is the ambassador?" No one answered. At the orbital dock, Sarah Kale sat in the observation lounge. Her coffee stain had faded to rust on gray wool. She had been sitting there for 3 hours watching the same patch of sky. The lounge was empty. She was the last human in the system, aside from 19 crew members on transport ships. She looked at the stain on her sleeve. 18 years. She could still smell the coffee, dark, slightly burnt, the way he had always made it. She could still hear his voice. Don't rush. We have time. They had not had time. The fall of Thurnus took 60 days. He was gone on day 7. She had waited for the council to listen. They had not. She had waited for the Vrethkar to stop conquering. They had not. So she had started waiting for something else. She had started waiting for the moment the galaxy would realize it was wrong. She had not known when that moment would come. She had only known that it would. The clock on the lounge wall read 0R. It had been stuck for 18 years. She touched the stain. I waited, she said aloud, until you were ready, until they were blind, until the silence was loud enough. She paused. The stars did not answer. Now I don't know what to do next. In the rotunda, Lycia convened a subcommittee, herself, Vithra, 3 others, and 1 Vrethkar attaché. We need to make a statement, Lycia said. The galaxy is watching. If we do nothing, we confirm we have no response. We have no response, Vithra said. That is the truth. Then we need to find one. The Vrethkar attaché looked up. What if they are waiting for us to ask? Lycia turned. Ask what? Ask them what they want. Ask them why they waited. Ask them what they are going to do now. We have already lost the fleet, the classification system, the belief we were right. The only thing left is the chance to ask a question. The equations on Lycia's crown flickered. Inquiry recommended. Prepare a transmission, she said. Address it to the human fleet. Ask them what they want. What tone? Scribe Marin asked. Quiet, Vithra said. We have been loud for 9,000 years. It is time to learn how to be quiet. At the orbital dock, Sarah's communicator buzzed. The screen displayed, transmission from the Galactic Council, addressed to the human fleet. She opened it. It contained a single question. What do you want? Sarah read it 3 times, carefully, methodically looking for hidden meaning. She found none. The question was genuine. She looked at the stain on her sleeve. She remembered his voice. Don't rush. We have time. She closed the message. She did not reply. She stood, walked to the window, and watched the stars. The human fleet hung in the distance, 37 ships in the dark, waiting. She had been waiting for 18 years. She could wait a little longer. But she knew now that the waiting was almost over. The galaxy had asked. Sooner or later, she would have to answer. The Council's transmission repeated every 60 seconds. No reply came. On the Vrethkar flagship, Vex-Kor watched the communication log. He saw the outgoing message, the lack of response, his own hollow face in the dark screen. He had been wrong about the humans. He had been wrong about the Council. He had been wrong about the war. But the humans had not been wrong about him. They had read his schematics, studied his tactics, waited for him to make a mistake. He had made it the day he killed a screaming soldier who had been running towards something he could not see. He looked at his daughter's face on the communicator. She had not responded. She was still learning. He hoped she would never have to learn the way he had learned. He closed his eyes. The silence was complete. 2 hours and 43 minutes later, the Council received a second transmission. It was from Ambassador Sarah Kale. The message was brief, a single sentence in perfect Vrethkar. You asked what we want. We want you to remember this moment. The rotunda went silent. No one spoke. Then Elder Vithra walked to the speaking platform. She did not raise her hand. She did not ask for recognition. She simply stood there and said, She is not finished. She has given us a task. We are supposed to remember this moment, to carry it into every future vote, every future classification. We are supposed to become the species that does not forget. She paused. The silver light caught the edges of her skull. We cannot unsee what we have seen. We cannot unlearn what we have learned. The galaxy has been changed by a silence loud enough to make us hear ourselves. She looked at the empty Vrethkar seats, the empty human seat, the stars through the viewport. We are not ready to answer her question. But we are ready to sit with it, and that is the first step. She sat down. The chamber sat in silence. No one knew what to say. The chamber sat in silence. No one knew what to say. Elder Vithra remained on the speaking platform, her small hands gripping the edge. She had said everything she could. Now she waited, like the rest of them, for a voice that would not come. Lycia's crown flickered, no procedure defined. The equations had given up. They had been designed for 9,000 years of certainty, and they had no category for a species that answered a question with a task. We have to respond, Lycia finally said. She asked us to remember. We can do that. We can record this moment, preserve it in the archives, make it part of the Council's permanent record. That is not what she meant, Vithra said. She did not ask us to file a memo. She asked us to carry it with us. To let it change the way we vote, the way we classify, the way we see the quiet ones. Lycia's crown shifted. A new line appeared. Record vote, not procedural, requires discussion. We have been discussing for 3 hours, the Vrethkar attaché said quietly. We have not reached a conclusion. We will not reach a conclusion. Not today. She knows that. She is not waiting for a decision. She is waiting for us to admit that we are lost. The attaché's claws rested on his knees. He looked at the empty human seat. The ambassador is not coming back, he continued. She said what she needed to say. She walked out. She will not return to this room. She has given us the silence we deserve, and now we have to live in it. Lycia turned to the viewing channel. The human fleet still hung in the Thurnus system, motionless. No transmissions, no demands, no threats. Send another query, she said. Ask her if she will accept a formal apology. Ask her if there is anything we can do to repair what we have broken. The message was sent. It was repeated every 60 seconds for the next 10 minutes. No reply came. At the orbital dock, Sira Kale sat in the observation lounge watching the stars. Her communicator had buzzed 23 times in the last hour. She had not opened any of the messages. She had read the first one, the question, and she had answered it with a task. Now she was waiting. She had been waiting for 18 years. She could wait a little longer. She reached for her thermos. It was empty, but she unscrewed the cap and held it to her nose. The faint scent of old coffee lingered. Dark, slightly burnt, the way he had always made it. She had not washed the thermos since the day he left. She set it down. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the document she had read in the rotunda. The creases were deep, worn from years of folding and unfolding. She had carried it with her for 300 days, waiting for the right moment. She unfolded it. The ink was fresh, but the words were old. She had written them the night before, alone in her quarters, with a cup of cold coffee beside her. She had not read them aloud until she stood on the platform. Now she read them again silently. On Sol date 214.7.04, Earth's Defense Council activated Operation Shepherd. The operation was prepared 300 years ago, classified under the Veyron Charter. It was designed to be activated in the event of an existential threat to human-occupied space. She paused. That was the public version. The version she had read to the Council. The version that had explained the fleet, the drones, the pulse. But there was a second page. She had not read it aloud. She had folded it into the document and kept it hidden. She unfolded the second page. The words were older, written in her own hand 37 years ago, when she had first seen the Vrethkar schematics. She had been a xenolinguist then. She had been young. She had been terrified. The page read, "The Vrethkar Dominion has built its fleet on a single design. They have not updated it in 40 years. They have not considered that someone might read their blueprints. They have not considered that someone might wait. We have been waiting. We have been reading. We have been mapping every weakness, every vulnerability, every assumption they made about us. We are not a Category 7 primitive. We are a species that learned to be patient. And patience is the only weapon they cannot see coming." She folded the page again. She slid it back into her pocket. Then she reached for her communicator. She opened the latest message from the Council. It was the same question, repeated again. "What do you want?" She typed a reply. 3 words. She sent it. The rotunda's viewing channel flickered. A single line of text appeared. In perfect Vrethkar, the same grammar and syntax as the first message. "We want you to hear this." The chamber held its breath. Then the audio feed opened, and Ambassador Sarah Kale's voice filled the rotunda. Low, flat, almost conversational. "You classified us as primitives. We classified you as predictable. You measured us by our ships. We measured you by your assumptions. You thought we could not fight. We knew you could not learn. You spent 9,000 years building a system that told you who was important and who was not. We spent 300 years proving that system was wrong." She paused. The silence in the rotunda was absolute. "You have asked what we want. We want you to sit in this moment and feel what it is like to be wrong. We want you to carry that feeling into every vote you cast, every species you classify, every war you decide to ratify. We want you to remember that the quiet ones are not weak. They are waiting." She paused again. Her voice softened, just slightly. I have waited 18 years for this moment. I have worn the same coat, the same stain, the same memory. I have carried it with me into this room every single day. And now I am leaving it here. The coat stays, the memory stays, the stain stays. It is the only warning the galaxy will ever need. The transmission ended. The rotunda was silent for a long, long time. Then the Vrethkar attaché stood. He walked to the empty human seat. He reached down and picked up something that had been left behind, a matte gray coat, folded neatly, the coffee stain on the left sleeve catching the silver light. He held it up. The stain was brown, faded, shaped like a smudge of old regret. No one spoke. No one moved. The attaché carried the coat to the speaking platform and placed it on the podium. He stepped back. "Record this," he said. "Record that a Vrethkar placed a human coat on the Council's highest platform. Record that we did not destroy it. Record that we left it there, where everyone can see it, as a reminder of the silence we created." He sat down. The equations on Lycia's crown flickered one last time. Then they went dark. On Vrethkar Prime, High Admiral Vex Kor watched the transmission on his personal screen. He had seen the ambassador's face, heard her voice, read the words that had ended his empire. He sat in his quarters, the bronze plaques on his wall glinting in the dim light. 9 campaigns, 5 worlds, 40 years, all of it erased by a pulse that lasted less than half a second. He looked at the communicator. His daughter had not replied. He did not expect her to. He touched the scar over his right eye. He remembered the soldier who had given it to him, her face, her scream, the way she had run toward something he could not see. Now he understood. She had been running toward the moment when the Vrethkar would stop paying attention. She had been running toward the countdown. And the countdown had reached 0. He closed his eyes. "The message is correct," he said aloud. "Silence is the loudest thing we ever learned to speak. I have learned it now. We have all learned it now." He opened his eyes. He looked at the plaques. He reached up and took the first one off the wall. The one from Tessar. The one that bore the name of the system where the soldier had died. He held it in his claws. He studied the engraving. Then he set it down on the desk, face down. He would not display it again. He would not celebrate what he had taken. He would spend the rest of his life learning what he had lost. The silence in his quarters was the silence of a man who had finally heard himself. In the rotunda, the coat sat on the podium. Elder Vithra walked to the platform. She did not touch the coat. She simply stood beside it, looking at the stain. 18 years, she said quietly. She wore this coat for 18 years. She carried the stain of her husband's last cup of coffee. She carried the memory of his ship, his death, his absence. She carried it into this room every day, and we never asked about it. We never saw it as anything other than a mark on a diplomat's uniform. She turned to the chamber. She was not hiding, she was waiting. She was waiting for us to notice that she was human, and we did not notice until she had already won. She stepped back. The coat stays, the stain stays, the silence stays. Let it be a lesson to every species that sits in this room. The quiet ones are not empty. They are full. Full of waiting, full of patience, full of the one weapon the loudest voices can never defeat. She sat down. The chamber did not applaud. No one spoke. No one moved. The coat remained on the podium. The galaxy did not hear from Earth again. Not that day, not the next, not for a long time. The human fleet remained in the Thurnus system, 37 ships in the dark, waiting. The data buoys continued their loop, but the message grew fainter, softer, like a whisper fading into memory. The council reconvened 3 weeks later. The Vrethkar seats were still empty. The human seat was empty, but on the podium, at the center of the rotunda, the coat still hung, folded, neat, the coffee stain a brown smear on gray wool. No one moved it. No one discussed it. It became part of the chamber, like the fossilized star heart, like the silver veins, like the equations that had gone dark and never lit again. The council voted on new classifications. They voted on new territories. They voted on new wars. But they did not vote the way they used to. They hesitated. They looked at the coat. They remembered the silence. And somewhere, in a room she had left behind, Ambassador Sira Kale watched the stars. She had answered the question. She had said what she needed to say. She had given the galaxy a task. Now she was waiting again. But this time she was not waiting for them to listen. She was waiting for them to remember. The stain on her sleeve had been there for 18 years. She had left the coat behind, but she had not left the memory. She touched her sleeve, where the stain used to be. Her fingers found nothing but wool. She smiled. Then she turned away from the window and walked toward the transport that would take her home. The stars did not blink. The silence was complete.